have seen the torch of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this wonderful land of ours, I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we have faced for several decades now, and that affects so many areas, every area of our lives, from our individual relationships to our family relations, our community relations, our politics, our business affairs, international affairs. Every single aspect of our lives is impacted by the character issue. And we have been in a crisis for some period of time because we've been living in an age of such relativism and entitlement and permissiveness. And it's affecting us all. And I promised at various points late in the year last year that this year the program would be taking a slightly new direction. I also suggested that I might need a different theme song. But I've given some thought to that. We are going to be taking a slightly different direction, that's for sure. But whether or not I need a new theme song, I'm not sure. For those of you who are new to the program, the reason you hear the song that my wife and I composed several years ago now, 18 years ago, 19 years ago, the reason you hear it at the beginning and the close of the program is because of the interrelationship that exists between freedom and character. The premise is simple. You give people with a solid moral compass maximum freedom. Freedom from unwarranted government interference and intrusion into their lives. Freedom from restrictions. You give them liberty. And people of good character will not only do wonderful things for themselves, but they will also create opportunities for others. And in the absence of character, there is always pressure for governing institutions to try and legislate morality, which only impacts the freedom of decent people, because character-disturbed people don't pay any attention to the rules and restrictions and laws that we write or that we try to impose. So the only freedoms that are impaired are of good and decent people. We've witnessed that big time. We should have learned by now, but we haven't learned. So the message in the song that you hear is about where America's greatness really lies. Our current president ran on the slogan to make America great again. America has indeed had periods of greatness. It's also had periods of great shame. But the message in the song is that America's greatness has never resided in its economic power, which is considerable, or its military might, which is also considerable, but rather in the character of its people, who, when they live out its best ideals, create an environment like the world has not seen. It's the idea, it's the very idea of what America was supposed to represent that drew people here like a magnet. And I'm going to be speaking tonight, as I will be increasingly on this program, about the character pathology that is destroying the greatness of America from the inside out. There is a cancer at work. It's insidious and it's growing. And I can no longer be complicit in its enabling. I was very, very guarded several months ago. Actually, it was almost 2 years ago now that I gave a first major interview to a reporter from Vanity Fair magazine. I was very, very careful because a lot of people were pointing to the apparent narcissism in our current president. And the reporters were seeking professional opinions. And I have certain professional ethics that I'm careful to observe. So even though I was falsely quoted in part of the article, which then made its way to the Atlantic magazine and then to Psychology Today and to other major publications, and still gets a lot of play in various forums. Even though I was misquoted, I was careful, very careful, not to do as some other mental health professionals had done, which is to diagnose, to confer a diagnosis remotely without a personal examination, just judging on certain behaviors. So when I was asked, I even appeared on a program. I appeared on the Lawrence O'Donnell Last Word program on MSNBC. And he tried to get me to say that Donald Trump had a narcissistic personality disorder. Wouldn't do it, because it's against professional canons. Even though The narcissism in this man is self-evident. I even went so far to point out to the reporter who did the initial interview that played first or appeared first in the Vanity Fair magazine, made the point that our very definition of what constitutes a disorder has become flawed for our times. Because for something to meet the criteria of a disorder, it has to be dysfunctional, has to not work, has to impair the person's ability to function. And when somebody has a personality that is winning them friends and is not tearing their relationships apart and is making them tons of money and advancing them in all spheres of life, by our accepted definitions, it's hard to call it a disorder. But tonight, I have to speak very, very frankly about the core of narcissism, about the core of it, and what makes it so insidious and dangerous, and why, even though these days it's hard to term certain behavior disordered by the definitions that we've classically had, because they work. Like it or not, the way our culture has shaped up over the last several decades, narcissism works. It's functional. And that's perhaps the saddest statement of all. We live in egocentric times. I've been posting on this repeatedly on my blog at manipulative-people.com or drgeorgesimon.com. Either URL will take you to the same place. But tonight, I want to speak to the core of narcissism, to you. I'd like to hear your comments on it too. And I'm going to use, for the first time, as a prime example of it, the behavior of our president, which is exemplary in so many ways of what must change for us to be well again and for us to be great again as a society. You want to make America great again? Then even though de Tocqueville never said it, the quote attributed to him has merit. And that quote is that we have to be good again. He is quoted as saying, America is great because it is good, and when she ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. He never actually said that, but there's wisdom in the quote attributed to him. And there is no good in narcissism. So we're going to talk about that. And sadly to say, I'm going to exemplify the horrifying features of this character disturbance with the behavior of our president. Now, at the core of narcissism, you see, narcissism is actually a complex phenomenon that is poorly understood. And there are different types of it and different manifestations of it. In the article I posted last Friday on my blog at manipulative-people.com or drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com. The article I posted last Friday expands upon the information I give in my books, Character Disturbance, The Judas Syndrome, How Did We End Up Here, and, of course, the international bestseller, In Sheep's Clothing. And I explain that there are different types and manifestations of narcissism. And the article I posted on Friday talks about the more vulgar expression of narcissism. You know, there are some narcissists who are completely charming in their manner. They know how to seduce you. They know just what to say to endear you to them, but that still doesn't mean that they aren't all about them. The reason they want you to like them is because they want to aggrandize themselves, and they can be quite convincing about why you should throw yourself at their feet. So the charmers among us reveal their narcissism in a different way, a much more palatable way, a much more seductive way. And then there are the more vulgar types. And what's different about them, what distinguishes them, the vulgar types, the kind who don't seem to be affected by any of the negative feedback they get, by any of the reactions of horror and disgust that they get when they do the things that they do. The thing that distinguishes those folks is their utter lack of capacity for what we call human empathy. They cannot and do not care. They can feign it because they know they can't and don't, and they know that most humans can and do. So they can feign it, but it's disingenuous, which is why they cannot help themselves when they demean and disdain. They'll do it repeatedly, and they'll do it uncaringly. And it is a mark of a severely character-disturbed individual, character-impaired individual. You judge by behavior. It's one of the things that I teach in all my workshops, everywhere I go, and that I emphasize in all my books. You judge by behavior. You know, the traditional psychology that most of us were schooled in tried to teach us to look for the underlying wounds and insecurities and fears and whatnot that might underlie somebody's inappropriate behavior so that we could understand and forgive and perhaps help them to learn better or to see better the error of their ways. But behavior is a better reflection. And, by the way, it's also the best predictor. The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. That's the very best predictor. You know, it pains me. It pains me greatly to look out at our political landscape. Believe me, I'm not just picking on our current president. He is but an egregious example of a widespread phenomenon that is killing us. It's killing us. We will not be great again until we are good again. And that means good to each other. But I started out earlier saying that there are some core characteristics to narcissism that you must understand. Yes, egocentricity is central to it. Yes, grandiosity is central to it. But you know, we get the term narcissism from the Greek myth, the tale of Narcissus. Narcissus the hunter. And everybody is familiar, most folks are familiar with the basics of the story. Narcissus comes upon his reflection in a clear pool of water in a deep well, and he falls in love with his own reflection. But central to the story is another character in the story, a nymph by the name of Echo. And, you know, in Greek tragedies, in Greek myths, there are heroes and then there are superheroes. And believe me, you are one superhero when all the nymphs are chasing after you. It's a real badge of honor. But in the story of Narcissus, Echo is chasing him throughout the story, trying to gain his favor. But Narcissus is not fazed. He is completely unfazed by the advances of Echo. And why? Because he has already found all that he needs in himself. And that's the core pathology in narcissism. You see, narcissists may have use for other people. They may appear to need others, but they don't need in the same way that most of us need. They are, as one of the great researchers of our time on character disturbance, Stanton Samanow, once said, legends in their own minds. They don't really need anyone else. And as we now know from strong research, in some cases, they also can't care. And so this sets up a dynamic that is extremely pathological and always destructive. There's a haughty disdain that emanates from them. As Leon Helmsley once commented when people were confronting the Queen of Mean, as she used to be called, about her apparent disdain of others and the income taxes that she and her husband had been accused of evading. Only the little people, she said, pay taxes. Only the little people. In that statement, the disdain for those seen as beneath her grandeur was revealed. Narcissists can't hide their disdain. I've written about this several times. You can find several articles on it on manipulative-people.com or drgeorgesimon.com. Now, I know that some of you may be upset with me for taking this stand. I assure you, it is not a political statement. We have such a great divide in this country, and the reason for the divide is we have opposing points of view, and we have people entrenched in those views, and we have no love to bring us together. Love is always unifying. The evil one wants to divide. Both sides of the spectrum have valid issues and points. Both sides. And we have the power to come together and validate the truth in both sides. If we cared to, but we care more about our self-righteousness than we do bridging the divide. And that reveals our lack of love. And that is the great command. And that's what's wrong with us, is this self-serving self-indulgence, this self-justification, this deeply, deeply rooted narcissism that is killing us, taking us down. Maybe you hear what I'm saying, and maybe you agree with it in part, at least. Maybe you strongly disagree. I would like to hear from you in any case. If you want to join the conversation, we are live tonight on Sunday, January 14th, 2018. We are live. You can take your calls at 501-258-8326. That's 501-258-8326. 501-258-8326. Happy to have you join the conversation. My goodness. What a mess our age of relativism, permissiveness, and especially entitlement has created. What a mess. What a character disaster we have ushered in. And what a vicious cycle we have perpetuated, with more and more and more character disturbance, ripping apart the best fabric of our culture. I see we have a call coming in. I'm going to take it. Hello and welcome to Character Matters.
Well, good evening, Dr. Simon. How are you?
Well, I wish I could say that I were feeling great tonight, but I am so sad. It's just really, it's really unnerving to me that we find ourselves in the situation that we are.
I understand, Dr. Simon. This is Susan from Virginia.
Hi, Susan.
We haven't talked for quite a long time. I've been busy writing a couple of books myself.
Oh, have you?
Yes.
Hey.
The first one's called The Meaning of Christianity. It is about the psychology of religious beliefs and how it impacts our social systems.
Uh-huh.
And the second one's called Taming the Feral Human, about my experiences taming feral cats.
Ah.
Yeah. But the reason I called in, I've been listening to your broadcast. In the first part of your broadcast, you said that we have not learned. I don't think it is that we haven't learned. I think one of the problems with these deeply narcissistic, incredibly damaged people is that they have obtained such a social, economic, and moral stranglehold on all of our systems that this is basically becoming a self-perpetuating entity in and of and by itself.
You raise a good point. You raise a very good point. And I mention in all of my books that it's not just that this character disturbance is enabled. It's promoted, and it's even rewarded. It's even rewarded. And, you know, when I encounter, I've had the great pleasure as a therapist. I've had two great pleasures. I have been able to take those victims of narcissistic relationships who have been downtrodden, who have been victimized in so many ways. I have been able to help them get back their legs, to empower them, to find a new sense of strength and purpose. That has been just the greatest blessing of my life. And I've also, however, been able to, with those folks who have severely hurt others because of their character disturbances, but they finally come to a place in life where they have come to appreciate that something had to change, and that something had to be them and their character. I have also been able to help, through some real tough love, confront and help correct the patterns of behavior that have been so destructive, and actually help people of deficient character grow into better characters. This has been the greatest blessing of life. And
now that sounds almost miraculous. I mean, it really does.
Well, but what has to happen there is the bottom has to fall out. You know, the folks in the 12-step programs have always known this. There has to be a rock bottom point. And the problem, as you rightly point out, is unfortunately some of these character styles are so heavily reinforced and rewarded, there is no reason on earth for the person to consider change.
Exactly. And that is exactly the next point I wanted to make. When you're dealing with these malignant narcissists, be they vulgar narcissists or just what I would term basically pure evil,
yes,
they play with people. They know how, even though they do not necessarily have these emotions, understand these emotions, they do know how to play with people.
Yes.
They regard emotions as a weakness to be exploited.
Yes.
To these people, manipulation is basically a form of mind control.
And it's a form of personal entertainment. They really get off on it.
They do. They know what to say. They know how to say it.
Yeah.
And most importantly, they know what not to say in order to cause us to come to conclusions they wish us to concoct.
Right.
While we are maneuvered into believing that we reached this conclusion on our own.
Yeah, for them it's a confirmation of their superiority. The fact that they're able to pull those strings and get away with it makes them think, you see, I really am all that, and these poor suckers really deserve basically the playing that I gave them. Yeah.
Sure. And when you can confront them, no matter how you try to, and you realize, of course, I am speaking from personal experience here. These people, they can utterly rationalize their actions and their behaviors, past and present, in an incredibly rational way.
Right.
Unless you take careful notes of the difference between their words and the reality of their action.
Right. Now, I want you to hang on here.
So alert.
I want you to hang on here because you've made such absolutely great point. But I want you to hang on here for a minute while I address one thing that you said in the beginning.
Okay.
You made the assumption that these people are damaged. And indeed, some are. But it is a fatal assumption to many, many potential victims out there to assume that the origins of this narcissism is always rooted in damage. It is a fatal assumption, and it is an incorrect one. Sometimes that happens, but it is not a necessary condition for it to happen. And all too many people have stayed way too long in abusive relationships, assuming that there must be damage underneath it and believing that if they could just get to it and nurture it or mend it, they could end their nightmare.
They could fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I understand exactly what you're saying, and I'm so glad you pointed that out. I spent a lot of time as a legal advocate for battered women and children. I was in the trenches. I would go out with the police department for domestic violence calls, rescue these women, take them to the hospital, get them patched up, take them to our shelter. We would get them set up there. We would counsel them.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that they all, almost every one of them had in common was this unwillingness to examine why their behavior and why their thinking led them to be attractive to men who would abuse them. It's like jumping into a shark-filled pool and you've got bloody wounds.
Oh, you know what? You are incredible tonight. I am so glad you raised that issue. I'm so glad you raised that issue because I was just actually I got an email from another author who actually was gently accusing me of not affording proper credit to some research that had been done, but actually in my post this past, not this past week, in my post of 2 weeks ago on my blog, I had made the point that 22 years ago, when I was completing the research for my first book, In Sheep's Clothing, I conjectured on the basis of my clinical experience after hundreds of case studies, I conjectured that the two qualities that victims in these relationships would be found to have would be excessive conscientiousness, in other words, an overactive conscience, and a predisposition to what I call deference. In other words, the over-willingness to accommodate or to defer to somebody else's better judgment or what they perceived as better judgment. And it turns out that Purdue University did a study a couple of years ago, and they came up with two factors that are at work. And one was indeed conscientiousness, and they labeled it the same. The second factor they call agreeableness instead of deference.
Yes.
And so the person thought when I posted this article that I was basically not giving credit where credit was due to the current research, when in fact I was only touting basically research of 22 years ago, and I did mention that current research appears to be backing that up. So I put in a link in the article to the Purdue study, which is actually not the greatest control study, which is why I didn't bother to reference it. But my patients taught me this many, many, many years ago. You're absolutely right. There are some characteristics of the people who are vulnerable, and it's so sad that one of the biggest variables that makes somebody vulnerable is having a decent conscience.
Yes.
Because this is what exactly these people play on. Yeah.
Yes, and it's like these women wear a sign on their forehead.
Yeah.
You know,
yes.
I am agreeable, I am compliant, come abuse me.
Yeah, exactly.
And to the the narcissistic abusers out there, it's a big come on.
Yeah.
The biggest problem that we always had in this work, we would see the same women come through the system repeatedly, because after we get her set up on her own with the job, get the kids in school, we would continue the counseling, and then she'd miss a class. Now, she'd have a good excuse, but then she'd miss another class. And then she would begin missing classes, and we could read the signs. A lot of times, her abuser had found her and was wooing her again with flowers and candy and love words, and, oh, he's changed, yada, yada, yada. Or she had found someone new of the same mold to victimize her. So the hard part was getting these women to understand that they cannot change the fact that there are abusers out there. The only thing they can change is they can learn about themselves. They can learn why they think the way they think. They learn to change their thinking. We try to teach them to be alert for signs of predators. It's a very long, hard-fought job. It's a very hard job.
Yeah.
But
one other point that I would like to make, though, about the cases, especially of abusers, because not all narcissists are severe abusers. They all emotionally abuse, but not all are physical abusers or whatnot. But the other thing that my clients taught me a long, long time ago is that even when the person begins to suspect that they really need to get out, one of the things they know about the characteristics of the abusive party is that they subordinate to no one or nothing. They are always looking for the dominant position. They want to be on top and in control. And the thing that is anathema to them is no. And so therefore, the most dangerous time for them is when they think about not taking it anymore. And the abuser knows this. And the abuser's mind is, it's not over unless I say it's over. And what every victim has had to learn, unfortunately, the hard way, is that there's no restraining order strong enough to keep these folks at bay, that there's really no safety. So what they begin to believe, unfortunately, is that deference, that caving in, is the safest path. Does that make sense?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. That is the critical time. The other thing that these people are so good at is gaslighting.
Yeah.
They can rationalize anything. And the rationalization is so plausible.
Right.
It's and their way of wording it so that this person believes that it actually, oh, well, they did misunderstand, or it was their fault, or they didn't hear them properly, but it's never, ever the narcissist's fault.
Right.
They're very, very, I call them Teflon people.
Right.
Because no responsibility ever sticks to them.
Yeah. Boy, I can't.
Reflect it onto others.
Boy, I can't tell you. You know, I really gave a lot of thought before I came on the air tonight to the issues that I wanted to address, and your call was so timely, and you raised such great points. Can't thank you enough, and I wish you such good luck with your books.
I appreciate it, Dr. Simon. as you and I both know, and this is the other thing too, I think our religious system is under the same control that we talked about earlier. If you'll stop and look at how our churches are set up, most of them are not hospitals for sinners, they're hotels for saints. There's well-established pecking order.
I love that analogy. I'm going to have to listen to the podcast to remember a couple of these little pearls. But you know,
the point being is so many women that I've tried to help, they would go to their pastor.
Yeah.
And because their pastor was so deeply steeped in the traditional misogynistic view of Christianity, they would tell them that it was their duty to submit and to be submissive to their husbands.
Yeah.
So you see, religion has really dropped.
There's a wonderful blog. There's a wonderful blog out there called Cry for Justice that addresses that very issue. One of the operators of that blog contacted me many years ago, and we've been friends for a long time, and I've written a couple of pieces for the blog, but it's a great resource, Cry for Justice. It addresses that very issue. And, you know, that's another new direction that this program is going to be taking. We are no longer going to have the firm boundaries that I've had with respect to political discussion and spiritual issues. I'm not going to be careful with any of my deepest convictions anymore. We're going to be telling it more like it is, and we're going to be going head to head because it's time. We need.
Well, as Christians, we have to. As Christians, it is our duty because truth is truth.
Yeah.
No matter how you slice it, dice it, or try to cover it up or manipulate it, truth is truth. Yeah. And as Christians, we are honor-bound by our belief in God to present these truths.
Thank you.
You're really stepping out, and I admire you for it, and I thank you for it, because it's so sorely needed.
Well, thank you. I thank you for tell our listeners once again who you are and what your books are.
Oh, my name is Susan Bridges, and I've written 2 books. One is called The Meaning of Christianity, which basically delves into the psychology of religion and its impact on daily life. And the other one is called Taming the Feral Human, which is the story of my 62 years of working with feral cats, because there's still a misconception that feral cats cannot be tamed, that they're just a nuisance animal, when they're one of God's most incredibly complex and wonderful creatures.
Susan, will you also do me the favor of contacting me through the contact feature of my blog and send me that very same information so I can keep it in the archive?
I will certainly be glad to do so, Dr. Simon. I always enjoy getting your emails. The one that you sent last week about the vulgar narcissistic personality.
Yes.
It really was so timely, because I've been dealing with a vulgar narcissist, and you finally get to the point where they cross the line with you.
Yep.
To where it becomes too much, and you have to just fold your tent and walk away. Yeah. And when I read your post, I was thinking, now that was one of the most timely things I've ever read, because it just dealt with the situation I was presently engaged with.
Oh. Thank you so much, Susan, for your call.
Thank you, Dr. Simon, and I will continue to listen.
Thank you. Take care.
Good night.
Good night. Wow, what a great call. What a great call. There's still time if you want to join the conversation tonight. 501-258-8326. That's 501-258-8326. Be so happy to take your call. I've had a lot of response to the article on vulgar narcissism. But to get back to the current egregious example of it, it is not that the president used vulgar language. We've all used vulgar language at times. Although I have to say, and it's just I'm not saying this to toot my own horn. I just have kind of an internal. I grew up in a different age and in a different kind of an environment, and I'm pretty squeamish about certain words, and it just unnerves me to hear constant, almost vulgarity. It's almost like some words have lost their punch. They've lost their ability to make impact, because it used to be that you didn't utter certain words unless you really wanted to make an impact. And now certain bombs are dropped all the time, and nobody thinks anything of it. So when you want to make an impact, there's nothing left. But it's not just the word. It's the disdain reflected not just in the words, but in the constant barrage of words and pattern of behavior of our political leader that should bring to our awareness the severity of the problem that we face. When we can have someone at the helm with such severely impaired character and not recognize the danger, we are in the same position, as the caller mentioned, as any abused party has ever been in. They don't realize the danger until it's too late. Until it's far too late. We still have time. And we have to directly confront the forces that divide. This divide is growing wider. As if you are a practicing Christian, we supposedly believe that the command is to love, and love is always unifying. It is never divisive. It is unifying. We have to bridge the divide. There is validity, there is some validity to the arguments on both sides of the divide. It is our task, it is our call to be peacemakers. To find common ground, to build, to construct. Someone used the phrase, we need weapons of mass construction, as opposed to the weapons of mass destruction that we currently have threatening us all. The real threat, the most insidious threat, is the threat this character crisis poses to the very fabric of our society. Narcissism, unfortunately, in its many different manifestations and levels of severity, is systemic. It's widespread. It's not just enabled, but it's promoted, reinforced, rewarded. It pays off. It pays off big time. And for that reason, it will continue to spread and worsen. And it will tear us apart. good people, decent people, have to stand up. And how we stand up matters. Love is our command. And so that means peaceful resistance, calling out evil when we see it, and reaching people's hearts, killing with kindness, weapons of mass construction. All of our problems are rooted in the ills of the human heart. So we won't solve those problems unless we reach the human heart. We have to. We're dying. And the theme song you're going to hear once again as the program closes expresses the sentiments that both my wife and I hold dear. I love this place. I love the idea of this place. The very idea of leaving people alone, of not oppressing them, of affording them maximum freedom and therefore maximum opportunity. That very idea is phenomenal, but it is totally dependent upon character, because without character, license turns into, or freedom turns into license. And people abuse the freedoms that they have, and they exploit. And this is always destructive. So, I'm here to ask your support as I try to do my humble part to actually help make America great again. And we're not going to do it by saying that we'll close our doors to everyone but those who can immediately bring us profit. That's not what will make us great again. What will make us great again is when we have the regard for one another and the regard for those who just want a chance. When we have that kind of regard that helped us build one of the greatest societies on earth, when we have that, we'll be great again. And that's going to require more character than we've seen in any of our current leadership, including, fortunately, our president, who's provided the most egregious example of character disturbance in modern times. With that, I'm Dr. George Simon. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week on another edition of Character Man. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Shorelines to the prairies, to the city.